Hello, I'm Kevin Rolwing with the Tire Industry Association.
And I'm Doug Jones with Michelin North America. We've partnered with TIA to bring you another important safety message. In this video, we're going to look at the basic steps for performing a hazard assessment in a typical tire shop.
The guidelines that we're going to cover will help you determine what types of personal protective equipment, or PPE, are required and how you can create a safer working environment. Remember, personal protective equipment is the first step towards developing a safe workplace.
According to the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, employees must wear personal protective equipment to protect the eyes, face, head, and extremities. With the exception of safety shoes, in most cases, the employer is required to provide the equipment and ensure that employees are properly trained so technicians understand the following: when PPE must be worn and what types are necessary, how it must be worn and adjusted, the limitations of PPE, as well as the maintenance, lifespan, and disposal of personal protective equipment. In order to create a safe working environment, the work site should be assessed on a daily basis. While a manager or safety officer might conduct a periodic safety inspection, an alert technician can identify potential hazards and notify management right away if something needs to be corrected. Ignoring hazards may seem like the easy way out, but it puts everyone at risk. Technicians should pay special attention to the basic hazard categories outlined by OSHA: impact, penetration, compression or rollover, chemical, heat-cold, harmful dust, optical radiation, or biological. Look for any sources of motion where the movement of tools or equipment could result in a collision or impact. It's also important to look for any areas where employees can be exposed to any harmful chemicals. In fact, employers that use hazardous chemicals must have a program to ensure that the basic safety information is provided to exposed employees. OSHA's Hazardous Communication Standard also requires employers to develop a list of hazardous chemicals in the workplace as part of their written hazard communication program. Look for any instances where employees are exposed to chemicals in all physical forms, including liquids, solids, gases, vapors, fumes, and mists, whether they are contained or not. It's also important to make sure that every container is properly labeled and that containers are not reused if the contents are different than the original product label. Once the list is complete, the manufacturer or supplier of each chemical is required to provide an MSDS sheet so technicians will know what to do in the event of an accident.
For example, if a particular chemical gets into the eyes, the MSDS will instruct the first responder to either flush with water or to seek immediate medical attention. If the victim accidentally ingests the chemical, the MSDS will dictate if vomiting should be induced. The MSDS ensures doctors will know the exact chemical components so proper treatment can be provided.
That's why every tire shop must have a Material Safety Data Sheet, or MSDS, for every chemical that is used or handled in such a way that employees may be exposed under normal working conditions. The written hazard communication program must ensure that every technician knows which chemicals present a hazard, the type of PPE that is necessary to protect them from exposure, and the location of the MSDS sheets in the event of an emergency. Since truck tire service technicians are exposed to various hazards on a regular basis, protective eyewear or safety glasses with protective side shields are required. All protective eyewear and face shields must meet the minimum performance standards established by the American National Standard Institute, or ANSI. The dangers associated with tire service are real and must not be ignored. Sunglasses will not protect your eyes in the event of an accident. In this test, a hard-boiled egg is used to simulate an eyeball and is placed in the trajectory of a valve stem. At 100 psi, the valve core can create a serious hazard for anyone without proper eye protection. It's also important to note that when using rotary tools, such as a wire brush, a full face shield should be worn. Another area of concern is the potential for falling objects or the potential for dropping objects. In a typical tire shop, there is constant risk of heavy objects rolling over or falling onto your feet, so safety footwear with reinforced toe guards are required. All safety footwear must meet the minimum compression and impact performance standards outlined by ANSI. Leather uppers and steel shanks provide the best protection for truck tire and wheel service technicians. Wearing ordinary footwear may seem to be the best practice from a comfort standpoint, but it is definitely an unnecessary risk that can backfire unexpectedly. Keep in mind that technicians often work on wet or slippery surfaces, so non-slip rubber soles are recommended. However, unlike most other types of PPE, the employer is not required by law to purchase protective footwear for truck tire technicians, because the footwear can be worn outside of work. Whenever there is the risk of falling objects, or if employees might strike their heads on fixed objects, head protection must be provided to guard against impact. And like protective eyewear and footwear, all protective headgear must meet ANSI standards.
Federal data has shown that of the workers who suffer eye injuries, about 60% were not wearing protective eye equipment, and 99% of those suffering facial injuries were not wearing face protection. Likewise, 77% of the workers with foot injuries were not wearing safety shoes or boots, and 84% of the workers who suffered head injuries were not wearing hard hats.
Another hazard for technicians is the constant risk of cuts and punctures that comes with handling truck tires, rims, and wheels, especially when there is exposed steel. Therefore, every technician must be supplied with a pair of heavy-duty work gloves that will protect the hands and fingers from injuries. Tetanus disease can develop when bacteria in the soil enters the body through a cut or puncture, so the most dangerous kind of injury involves possible contamination with dirt, animal feces, or manure. While tetanus has a relatively high mortality rate of 11%, the rate doubles to 22% when patients have not been vaccinated. Medical experts recommend that adults should receive a tetanus vaccination every 10 years. The final piece of personal protective equipment that must be in place is hearing protection. According to the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, approximately 30 million workers are exposed to hazardous noise in the workplace. OSHA standards state that an 8-hour time-weighted average of 85 decibels is the point where a hearing conservation program is required. This graph shows the average decibel level for various construction tools, which would be used to determine the time-weighted average. For example, a hammer drill is almost 115 decibels, while a chainsaw is around 110. A chop saw produces around 106 decibels, and a skill saw tops out at 100 decibels. Since the impact wrench is well above the 85 decibel minimum with about 102 decibels, hearing protection is a must when using this tool. There are two general rules when evaluating noise levels in the workplace. First, if you have to raise your voice to talk to someone who's an arm's length away, then the noise is likely to be hazardous. Second, if your ears are ringing or sounds seem dull or flat after leaving a noisy place, then you probably were exposed to hazardous noise. Keep in mind, prolonged exposure to high noise levels can cause irreversible hearing loss or impairment.
The potential hazards inside a tire shop are very real, so technicians should always wear the appropriate personal protective equipment to guard against injury. Now that we have a better understanding of the required PPE needed for a safe workplace, let's watch Kevin perform a hazard assessment in a typical tire service facility.
When I'm doing a walkthrough inspection, I'm always going to pay special attention to the basic hazard categories, as well as any sources of motion that may put a technician at risk. I'm going to give special consideration to the proper personal protective equipment that's needed for every job in the shop. Finally, I'm going to locate the area where the restraining devices are located to inflate tires. Make sure technicians can stay outside the trajectory throughout the inflation process.
Perhaps the most important part of the shop to inspect is the area used for inflating tires. When a fully inflated truck tire experiences a zipper rupture, the blast of air can be deadly for anyone in the trajectory of the sidewall. That's why special attention should be given to any area where tires are inflated in a restraining device. For example, anyone walking in the door to the left will be directly in the trajectory when a tire is inflated in the restraining device. The tools on the floor also have the potential to become projectiles in the event of an accident, and radios are not recommended in areas where technicians should be listening for the signs of a zipper rupture. Here is an example of the correct location because the restraining device appears to be out of the traffic and work areas, but in the wrong position because the sidewall of the tire is within 1 foot of the wall. And to make matters worse, the device has been bolted to the floor, so the bolts can become shrapnel if the metal wall doesn't collapse first.
A restraining device is designed to absorb the energy and prevent a tire and wheel assembly from becoming a projectile during inflation.
For example, if a disc wheel is damaged by excessive heat, the rim diameter on one side becomes smaller than the other. In this controlled test, a tubeless truck tire is inflated on a heat-damaged wheel. When the tire and wheel assembly is properly positioned within a restraining device and the technician is standing outside the trajectory, there is minimal risk for injury when the tire separates from the wheel. In the same controlled test, the technician is placed directly in the trajectory of the sidewall during inflation. Notice that the restraining device absorbs the energy from the separation, but the blast of air is still sufficient to cause serious injury.
That's why it's equally important to make sure that every tire is always inflated with the proper equipment, whether it's inside a restraining device or mounted on the vehicle.
The first component that must be in place is a clip-on air chuck. This allows the technician to temporarily attach the air chuck to the valve stem and inflate the tire without the need to stand directly in front of the sidewall. The second component is a sufficient length of hose that allows the employee to stand outside the trajectory during the inflation and inspection process. Finally, all truck tire inflation devices must include an inline valve with a pressure gauge or a presettable regulator. Both are designed to prevent accidental overinflation and should allow the technician to deflate the tire without approaching the assembly in the restraining device. In this example, all of the necessary components for an OSHA-compliant inflation device are in place. However, this system has additional safety components, such as a central bank of quarter-turn valves that allows the technician to deflate a tire in a restraining device without approaching the assembly. It's also important to inspect the work areas to look for any potential hazards on the ground that may result in someone tripping or falling.
Some of the questions you should ask yourself are: how are the tires, wheels, and tire wheel assemblies positioned in the work areas? Are jacks and jack stands properly located on the floor in clearly marked areas? Are tools put away when not in use? And finally, are aisles and walkways free and clear of any tools, boxes, or other hazards that may cause someone to trip and fall?
When tires are temporarily being stored in the work area, make sure they are not in the traffic pattern and cannot fall on someone if they are bumped or moved. Wheels and rims should never be stored in an upright position because they can easily roll into the path of anyone working in the shop. Tire and wheel assemblies should never be stored or leaned against a post with a disc facing outwards. If the assembly falls over and the disc is facing out, it becomes a hazard for anyone in front of the assembly. However, if the disc is facing in, the assembly will fall straight to the ground without endangering anyone in the immediate area. Jacks and jack stands also create risks for a trip and fall accident, so they should be stored in a designated area that is clearly marked if it's located between the work bays. This technician is having difficulty moving the tire and wheel assembly because he did not leave a clear path to the garage. Tire irons, hammers, and other tools should be picked up immediately after use so they do not create additional hazards in the shop. In this example, the tools and tires on the ground are obvious hazards, so they should be properly stored when not in use. And even though the blanket is necessary to protect wheel mating surfaces, it creates a serious trip and fall hazard when it's left on the floor in the work area.
Housekeeping plays an important role in tire shop safety. Most slip, trip, and fall accidents can be prevented if spills are immediately cleaned up and areas with a lot of foot traffic are kept reasonably clean and free of obstacles.
The final part of the shop that should be inspected during the hazard assessment is the tire storage area. Since truck tires are often stored in stacks, technicians should do their best to prevent the stacks from leaning and limit the number of stacks that result in tires being overhead. If the tires are stored in racks, the best practice is to ensure that the top rack is accessible without a ladder or forklift. If accessing the top rack requires technicians to be off the ground, make sure the appropriate safety measures are taken to prevent them from falling. While it can be hazardous, truck tire and wheel service in a typical tire shop does not have to be dangerous. By performing a proper hazard assessment, providing the correct personal protective equipment, and carefully analyzing the work areas for potential risks, technicians can protect themselves from injury and improve workplace safety.
On behalf of the Tire Industry Association, I'm Kevin Rowling.
And on behalf of Michelin North America, I'm Doug Jones. Thanks for watching.